东坡将对对对线西方这江波扬东坡左北上，这波当小车电波的我西方这的就不得看罗就我那么老当面那两波上街将的别叫我叫都过了巷子。就多叫做切我，光子过年做就当着，早见的那公办的不，俺年节点的那就结束的，这个吧就那样子，那到公安就都做上我，一些叫做时间人不。这把节点送那让给我，公布去年就那样子。先就电波正面到也就三多让我就那样子，对着接着随波送马街，两面前接就那样子，广播突厥接电波，当前全面电波，在那一点叫做些地形是那样子。旁边的站着我就给人个送人追。觉得等到九九八，心觉就那小子，这年这月老样的老爸到那手段，先给大把眼点点，给的那样小子，对吧？这样我小心，给我别送走吧，让给三年要说的，的那上街的吧。Kama rare ma me da je ma se wa che ba me la lo da je da bu de xie che na de da se na de yue tang jie zi ba ye go feng dang nian jun ju zha de ga da na da qi yue lao zhu si bian so nian zhou wan zhou wan zhou.
Thus I have heard. At one time, the Blessed One was dwelling in the royal domain of Vulture Peak Mountain with a great gathering of monks and a great assembly of bodhisattvas. At that time, the Blessed One was absorbed in the samadhi of the many aspects of phenomena called profound appearance. At the same time, noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, looking at the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom, saw the five skandhas in their natural emptiness. Then, through the power of the Buddha, Venerable Shariputra said to the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva, how should a son of the lineage train who wishes to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom? Thus he spoke, and the noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva answered the Venerable Sharadvati Putra with these words. Shariputra, those men and women of the lineage who wish to follow the practice of the profound perfection of wisdom should look at it like this. The five skandhas should be seen purely in their natural emptiness. Form is empty, emptiness is form. Emptiness is not other than form. Form also is not other than emptiness. In the same way, feeling, recognition, compositional factors, and consciousness are empty. Shariputra, like this, all phenomena are emptiness, and having no characteristics, they are unborn and unceasing. They are not impure or pure. They neither decrease nor increase. Therefore, Shariputra, in emptiness there is no form, no feeling, no recognition, no compositional factors, no consciousness, no eye, no ear, no nose, no tongue, no body, no mind, no appearance, no sound, no smell, no taste, no sensation, no phenomena. There is no quality of sight and so on until no quality of mind and no quality of mental consciousness. There is no ignorance and no exhaustion of ignorance and so on up to no old age and death and no exhaustion of old age and death. In the same way, there is no suffering, no origin, no ending, and no path, no wisdom, no attainment, and no non-attainment. Therefore, Shariputra, since there is no attainment, bodhisattvas rely on and abide by means of the profound perfection of wisdom. And since their minds have no obscurations, they have no fear. Transcending falsity, they attain nirvana. All the Buddhas who dwell in the three times have relied upon the perfection of wisdom, and have become true and complete Buddhas of unsurpassable, perfect, and complete enlightenment. Therefore, the mantra of the profound perfection of wisdom, the mantra of insight, the unsurpassed mantra, the unequaled mantra, The mantra which calms all suffering should be known as truth, for it is not deceptive. The mantra of the perfection of wisdom is proclaimed. Teata om gate gate paragate parasamgate bodhi soha. Shariputra, this is how a bodhisattva mahasattva should train in the profound perfection of wisdom. Then the Blessed One arose from that samadhi and said to the bodhisattva mahasattva noble Avalokiteshvara that he had spoken well. Well done, O son of the lineage, it is so. O son of the lineage, since it is just so, the profound perfection of wisdom should be practiced just as you have taught, and the Tathagatas will also rejoice. When the Blessed One had said this, the Venerable Sharadvati Putra and noble Avalokiteshvara Bodhisattva Mahasattva and the entire gathering, as well as worldly beings, gods, humans, asuras, and Gandharvas, rejoiced and praised the words of the Blessed One.
小觉所我的那所我的，多觉千波的些多觉强，求在的罗波那那罗波，边就这边波那阿的上，娘的心了觉了所我的，上波东面一年能着的，求的的当着边边。耶拉格萨勒尼斯尼巴，雅杰西比吉拉索瓦尼，雅约约米苏吉勒卓当，达瓦扎巴里比古乔切，桑杰贡乔婆婆ယော塞索，萨摩达耶吉拉索瓦尼。西卓当边穷啊阿殿上，噶当殿边明光中殿前，念就当结过去苏拉苏，噶当那玛那拉苏瓦殿，当结心殿作结中阿玛，我到这边我说结作结。当天边道波开诸天，要是九八节那所万的，要说个的那么多节强，看了光的新年最重的，找到天幕我中正在边，这些那么能了所万的。让教所着跟了大业民，给上他把这边就俺就，在边这边他看这把业，生在先年能了所的，结我跟到养到那么大。这面就这边那龙学间，早到龙就有点绕左呢，多就讲给个人都说上节就，多就就那想就不多多年就说去，大约就别做那些，绕了偏些上。若不修三界处，所见穷难那想求不多当年就son，大约切切切别做难解，到了偏些三界，若不修三界，若能所见穷难那想求不多当年就son。大约切切切别做难解。罗罗偏些三界诸波修。哎呀，嗯，哎呀，他们说都这样的，是啊，溜溜的这些，我们这些当你妈见了的，你咋讲了？你们是3岁的小弟了话，妈9岁的小娃了，那小娃生的得记了，对不对？你记不是多不少的，当记，马西别说的这3、8岁来见的，该严重的对不过来了吧？我说就是目前一天到送的，老师该严重的点比，过来你要说呀了，对起。我呢，确实的搞了不搞样的，健康的，搞样的那不搞的。
So, in the beginning, let's take a deep breath and try to maintain peacefulness of one's mind, because we're here gathering or coming together to listen to the teachings of the Dharma. And Dharma, which literally means the provider of peacefulness of one's mind. And peacefulness here refers to happiness. That is what we're looking for. So therefore, when one is receiving the teachings, one should do so by not only just having a delightful mind, but also one should have a delightful physical attitude or physical outlook. Must be not just listening with somber face. Rather, one should listen to the teachings with delightfully, both mentally and physically. Lama Tsongkhapa stated, when one is receiving the teachings, one should do so with delightful face. That's what he said.
근데 제 그거야 당한테 대야 다 로변에 자신적이 개천이지로 근데 제 그거야 소소로 이제 상당히 당해나 뭐네 체들 배드 마음에 시원하게 조조해지 있나다 뭐네 체들 대치 찍고 인증해 들어 배제 때 인사래 인사 말에 아니 오늘 때 멤버들은 가서 나비존의 시비 체들이 풍부대 아니 무슨 단단히 맞춰게 내서 배는 가대서 콤바소를 지내 데들을 봐도 아니 콤바되는 아니 내서다 내서 야보보 나게 되지로 아니 대나기 유처바 집에 가라 콤보생에 대 단단한 콤보생은 다 단단히 주주 콤보생에 대 내서기 콤바되고 제 나시지 콤보생에 대 아니 저와네 가만히 되는 대체네 근데 롱에 지나 오늘 때 아니 조던 가르치 코 동해나 지메체메게 로그래 로고 말해 근데 지메체메게 로고면은 근데 여아치 가르쳐 버려 도아치 가르쳐 버려서는 아니 추억에 좀 쉬어왔잖아 더 신주 제지 근데 제 겁이 소리지래다
So it is true that in order for one to achieve this peacefulness of one's mind or genuine happiness, certainly it is not that easy to achieve. It takes time, effort, energy, and so forth. Just as even for one person to establish their mundane life, it takes tremendous time, energy, and effort. Suddenly, when it comes to the peaceful or the lasting happiness, achievement of lasting happiness, it requires effort and energy and rigorous effort, which is involved in order for one to achieve this lasting happiness. Because when we are talking about here, having to achieve happiness, we're not really talking about happiness of this life alone. According to Buddha Dharma, when we speak about happiness, we are speaking about happiness of numerous future lifetimes. And so if one does not accept the future life, when one passes away from this life, you are just gone, just like a candlelight, just exhausted and extinguished, and then you're done. So there's no more continuity of this particular candle, rather than having a completely different candle that is to be lighted, ignited. However, when it comes to our human life or the sentient being's life, this is completely different. Even though you may pass away from this life, but your life or your future life will still continue. It will still continue, because here, let's take this the physical body that we have right now. It is just like a house, or the place where you are actually staying, and just like the place or the house that I am right now, and the consciousness is the person who is actually living in this particular place. So we are actually living in our physical form, behind, and traveling, our consciousness or the oneself is still travels through the numerous lifetime of numerous future lifetime. So if this is the case, then what kind of causes and condition that is needed to become a better future life? It is not that we're having a future life without, having any causes and condition. It has a lot of causes and condition. When your very causes and condition is the one that actually determine what kind of future life that you have. So therefore, when we are receiving the teachings of Dharma, this is how we should analyze.
Maya tanda yi chi shewe kala taa wane ko joda chen chi yung roo ma re kuncho ki chi do re se ne yuwa ina ane ngone ne si ki kuncho ki chi do re we as ane kuncho se de nga so na tsen de ki tanda jiten shebo po kye lenpa na ki nga so chi kanga kuncho ki so yung jo chi ina ane tanda nga so tsen de le beso rangi beso ma je na de chi yung me do wa de na ki ne chewa shima na rangi beso che kungi chi ma re we as chowa nipa chi le sarwa.
So if one were to say that, well, it doesn't really depend on causes and conditions. There's some mighty beings who will place me in a better place. When I'm done with this life, it will place me in a better place and take me into a place where I can be happy and so forth. So if this is the case, if we look at ourselves at this time, even to have a temporary happiness or mundane happiness, is it really the mighty being is providing you this happiness, or you are making an effort to have this mundane happiness? This question could be asked to oneself as well.
다 가서기 나비 존에 계시 시에도 거 멤버 개발지 상제세나리 소설라마세나리 개견세나 아니 멤버를 빼자 아니 추여생인데 멤버를 빼자 아니 겐디세인데 내용을 빼자네 아니 거대고 쉬우지어라다 되게 내당이 텔레멘다이 토네 아니 란도지 내란도 단테 다 나비 존에 텔레보에 때로.
So in Buddhism, we always say that Buddha who's been one's own teacher or the guidance, who is also considered as one's physician, and then teachings or the Dharma that is given is taken as a medicine, and the Sangha community who are taken as an assistant to elevation of your sickness, and then so forth. So therefore, it is on this basis the Buddha has given the teachings. How do we engage in the practice that is what is to be abandoned and what is to be achieved?
아야, 드리제든 배는 자벨린 데노는 멤버 세마가 가세지 켜와이나요. 아니 강사라니 야나 비한통 거래 야나 비한원을 제제제얼서 소수유 주보 데노 라네지 마투 진제라 멤버 가리미가 가르켜나 제도 이제는 도 대나기 사제기 라니기 지 라네지 마투 진제라 아니 사제 되는 쇼데야나 제도 이제는 매여 말해서 그러.
So even though that, regardless of how the skilled the physician may be, so long as if you do not approach yourself to the physician to cure one's sickness, just simply by thinking about the physician alone will not elevate one's sickness. In the same manner, when we speak about teachings of the Buddha, we should put an effort to practice and bring about inner transformation by oneself, just by believing in Buddha or seeing Buddha or even worshiping Buddha or praying to Buddha will not help us to alleviate one's own suffering.
아야, 다들 다 산재기 가족에 내가 지금 산재 상주 선발라 아니 대파여나 아니 선발될 대표기 세네 아니 세주 야르로 아니 대지르데 라신 이제 수요지 되고 추기 신을 주지 여러 다 된대 제외 내가 저 된대에 다 주인들 선을 된대기 다 된대 선을 되는 로다지 있잖아요 아니 맞아 되면 투명 번에 랑게 저제 자이나면 받는 데 랑게 되니 나가 되니라 아니 시제도 저 넘발은 쇼도 예 치제.
So, however, if one has an irreversible faith in Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, it is because of the fervent faith in Buddhas and Bodhisattvas, one is able to, calm one's mind and eventually be able to, develop one's mind, or towards betterment. The faith is something that is also needed in practicing Buddha Dharma. So it is therefore, in the beginning, let's do a visualization of Buddha in the space above one's crown, who is surrounded by all the Buddhas and Bodhisattvas and lineage gurus of great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment.
아니 단다라니 단다 소소 나한지 너 소소 가서 직원들 장나토는 계좌미 받체 아니 사유 콜란데 있는 여바기 아니 지소제도 소매기 신전 용수 줘봐네 아니 하버데 단다 양 사용이 제잖아요 뭐 수위지는 강이 텐더라고다 근데 이거는 강이 텐더 최신 받던 줄 상제 상주선 받던 두 세와 전부이 마시 되게서 니지 지제네 대려연 선제 영수 줘봐데 대령 가서게 아니 지최 인도네시아에서네 네 라와나네 여사이지 아니 런도 지내더라 뭐네 지금 아슈슈제네 야지 다디에서 저 시사마제나 와 대신들 지제네 슈데 상인들 지제다.
So then, in their presence, not only oneself, but one is surrounded by all the sentient beings, entire sentient beings without exceptions, be it as a form sentient beings of formless sentient beings or the form sentient beings in the form realms or the formless realms. And also today, let's take an opportunity to also think about all those people who lost their life in this devastating earthquake that has happened in this South America, and also the people who are affected and are the victims of all those beings. Just think about all those beings being with us in the presence of all those Buddhas and Bodhisattvas. And just as we have a genuine desire to practice what is to be abandoned and what is to be achieved, similarly, imagine that they all have a similar wish or the motivation or intention to engage in the practice of in practice of abandoning an achievement. And just take a minute to meditate on it.
아이, 또 되게 결혼 치바지나네. 강세 바샤서네. 담아서기. 단 롤링 치드세나레. 네 롤링 치비시노세나데 그랬던데지. 아니 거스 보고인다네. 네 대다. 양라니 치고 있다는 메바 타입의 세제 탄지 있다네. 네. 뭐네 사제나지 송. 마이 핑크 로아. 아니 가서 소로 탄지 된디와 니보디와. 소로 긴지 니보디디와. 시데 텐레 땡다 네베장 당치 치비 당치 체다 되게 변해서 러친 대방이 비대다 상스 양소로 탄지 대비 장소한 대 요소하러 근데 되게 나네 친구들 친해져야 거네가 겨워서 뭐이 산지 된다 마고 날에 대바리지야 제지돼야지 년도와 예소나 그 선앙생에 대비 유유 사줘야지.
So with this, now with these motivations, the teachings that we're receiving is the great teachers on the stages of the path to enlightenment. And then think about that very purpose of receiving this teaching is to achieve happiness and overcome suffering of oneself and that of all other sentient beings. And think that I am receiving these teachings on this purpose. And so the teachings that we're receiving is really profound, vast and profound teachings, as abbreviated the Lam Rim has stated in the it is stated that all those teachings of the Buddha, the essence of the teachings of the Buddha, are encapsulated within this discourse, which is great deities on the stages of the path to enlightenment. So therefore, it is really, really fortunate for all of us to be able to have such a wonderful opportunity to take our time and engage in discussions on this particular texts.
아이, 사실 이제 송자라자. 중국 쯤바 때문에 제법이 채워서 또 투비 한번에 랑게 진짜 사이런 받듯이 뭔가네지 이샤르지 합득 이샤르지 제로와 또 고소 도제 되게 제마도나 아니 중국 쯤바 때문에 제법이 채워 당하를 기바치비 채워서 라유디 아니 상추기 산도 또 많이 때 아니 디디히 용 잡고 채워지래다 상관이지 지状态的간하는 제 사제를 고하네 아니다 친해 제대로 가서 다시 결혼제도 되어라래.
So then let's begin with our outlines, which is the greatness of the authors given in order to exhibit teachings as a noble source. For that, when one reflects one's mind upon this particular outlines, try to imagine all those great beings, the teachers from the Buddha Shakyamuni, all the way to one's own root guru. And the second outline is showing the greatness of the teachings in order to engender respect for the teachings. When we reflect our mind on this particular outlines, then think about this teaching encapsulate entire teachings of the bodhicitta and wisdom realizing emptiness. And then third outline is to how to listen to the teachings, in which with both the teacher and its authors, and what the teachings in its authors are great.
아야, 나 넘어가 좀 한번 저때 저만이 대대는 걸사. 런지 자와 신이 때문에 저때 때는 로치다 저기 뭐 자이 사지지 발로디. 런지 자와 신이 때문에 수에서 라이인데 가라. 내가 저기 지 개개질이 저 샤치식급이 소리 좀 고안해서나도 bed너로. 아니, 런지 저걸 세워라. 개자는 트그레스. 배셔 트네. 안 대냥래 저걸 세더라. 런지 자와 신이 때문에 세디. 아주 대모고 제 개개 대걸 세디. 아니 개개를 야고 저걸 소리 좀 고안해네. So
then next is how to rely on one's teacher, which is the root of one's spiritual path, and how the students then train their mind after having relied on the teachers. So now sometimes people get misunderstood, they misunderstand when it comes to rely on the teacher, which is to rely on teacher is one's root of spiritual path. They would just keep thinking about just serve the teacher and physically, providing him fooding, shelters, and so on. This is not what we're talking about here. If rely on one's teacher, relying on one's teacher really means the actual definitive meaning of the relying on the teacher is the root of one's spiritual path, is to rely on the teacher to receive the teachings. That is what it's meant. It is not emphasizing on service, you serve your teacher. That is not what is meant in this relying on the teacher, which being part of one's root of one's spiritual path.
Denelo cheta jaya riba ni ti tena nyimbo lembi shukuwa dang nyimbo cheta lembi su ni nyimbo cheta lembi su la ni nangji nangja la nyimbo ti se dang nyimbo len se ngong la song jubo chungme da tumo ya nangji riba nyang jubo chenda tumo jubo chenpe nangji riba nyang se len si tongpo nyingri ta jubo chenpe nangji riba nyang se len si la song te chen lang jubo go senche kwana tenpa sente cheta jibo su senche ne shoba lu si je tongpo nyingri ta senche ne shoba lu si ni senche ne shoba loba la logu bi jen sen 타시르르 와로로베 산제마 주바 템바 로바로베 림바니 셰바지 다 도모니지 로바로베 림바니 셰바라 니 테바치 모чел로나데다 쳬바도 도제 테바로제지 동볼로송 샹사이 로발한데 장 장네 제세디 담바존 존네 제달렘베 츠웨지 다 동모니지 다 존네 제달렘베 츠로송 칼라로베제 텔라로베 림바 아래 칸라로베제 텔하바나데 텔라로베 림바지 텔라로베 림바니 셔바чел라로제다 쳬바도 파샤 타마니라로제지 동모지 파냐 타마니라로제로송 시네로제 라톤 로제 마레 너무 쭉 아니 신나다 하도 편하셔봐. 대니 땡겐지 그 뒤지 대봐. 신나다 하도 로도요. 대니가 방급이 이제 고랭이 봐 소셜로지. 다도 뭐 나들이 소셜로지라니 신나로지 하도로지 도모지. 다 하도로지라 이제 하도도做的 하도로도 하도 간배 하도 준비지. 다 동보라니 송 장대당에 소라 거서 루주지고 먼저 비치다 좀 도모니 대관하니 다와 테나 페바 베지 도마니제 다와 테나 페바지 다 도마니 다비니 데코나니는 주거든 바다 데코니 테나 페바 뭐지 돈벌라 가장 뭐좀한테 데카바 다라카기 루시바 셰바 텔라 테네 다와지라 제베린 바시데네 데카바데 다라카기 루시바 생이 테라가 소리데 당가 저기 거스 봐봐 엄마 탄저와도 엄마를 하지바 생에데 간제지에 세게체듯이 엄마 탄저와기 최탄저 라신지에 말에서 라유비가라 엄마 탄저와 면적이 연수 조바기 아니 때는 매바도 와지로 권해 아니 엄마 탄저와라 아니 조바제비 아니 된적이 전련도 당치
So currently we're on the chapter of discussing differentiation, different philosophical viewpoint of Madhyamaka Prasangika and Madhyamaka Svadantika, and when mainly having a discussions, having an argument between Madhyamaka Prasangika and Madhyamaka Svadantika and below, and the tenets, the schools of thoughts, having a discussion of having an argument between this with regard to Madhyamaka Prasangika's assertion of non-inherent existence of all phenomena, because the Madhyamaka Svadantikas and below have such an assertion, a notion that if one rejects inherent existence of anything, that then you're actually rejecting actual existence of all things. Whereas Madhyamaka Prasangika has a completely different interpretation of when they talk about non-inherent existence of phenomena.
아야 되게 넘버도 시나니 지난데 저마치 고만이나 되게 저번도서 되리 사실 저기 엄마 타저기 랑게 천이 조금 말에 라시 조금 말에서 라위비가라 아니 뒤 면제 요소 조바기 라시지 마드나 사원이네 시자라 타녀도 자투고요 말에 대 미투비가라 아니 저랑 엄마 타저데 양산로를 철로 다자요 말에 철로 쇼요 말에 철로 라루요 말에서는 저버서요.
So therefore, when the Madhyamaka Prasangikas, the followers of the Madhyamaka Prasangikas, says that there's no such things that exist inherently. There's no such thing that exists, intrinsic character and so forth. When other philosophical tenets, when other tenets are heard, when they hear about this statement, and they're just saying you are completely, fall into nihilism, and your view is nihilistic view, because so long as there's things that lack of intrinsic character, then there's no such thing that actually exists at all. So therefore, this is how the Madhyamaka Prasangika and the different view of Madhyamaka Prasangika and Madhyamaka Swatantrika and below.
되게 저기 고하는 제들이야. 타투는 엄마 탄저기 타투의 엄마 탄저기 따와래. 세데 아니 신의 차이 된저 로이 따장지 되는 마도 유대는 저이 잠못선지 조투 말에 살아요디 거라 아니 뭐지 양산로네 but 따와 된서기 너도 좀 말이다.
So here, Madhyamaka Prasangika's standpoint, the viewpoint is what we call the ultimate viewpoint, what we call, or it's just a final viewpoint, or the most subtle viewpoint, or the most superior viewpoint, we could say. Because when the Madhyamaka Prasangika says that there's no, everything that exists are mere imputed by thoughts and term. And when someone hear about this statement, as soon as at the moment they hear this statement, they cannot really think about how can the Madhyamaka Prasangika can actually say that such, statement which is completely nihilistic, and they cannot take it at all. They cannot digest this statement.
뭐야? 강가 수트는 용 다 시자를 전에 용 말이다. 가지 고아했더니야. 맞아기 소소지 치 간데 지는 거네. 코로나 때는 연하다 거네 전달을 했더니 또 해도 치면도 왔어. 그 전달을 맞대버디 자원이는 좀 무더기 연하다 코로나는 조세에 되는 거는 가와 차서로 와상이 되지로.
So when we are going through the reading of the text and that's arguments and so forth, although that we will not be able to understand precisely, in brief, this is what we were discussing. This is the debate that they're having in the text. When everything that exists, if things exist intrinsically or the intrinsic character by its own side, then how can we really accept that things that actually dependent on its own causes and conditions in the first place, right? As long as there's things that actually depended upon its own causes and conditions, then that really indicates that such things doesn't exist intrinsically by its own side.
Yeah. 당연히 로그인다. 가서 저도 거기 저도 되려야지. 가서 주 코로나 때는 지고세야 돼. 네 주 동반이 주를 이제 동반이는 이제 주신 야마르서 라위고라 이 주에서 그 거사 코로나는 주시비 타니 되기 밑에 코로나 라틴 쉬고 거래. 그러와 주 이때는 동반이 또 되기. 주 코로나 밑에 셔세디 진생이 온게 돈이 감비기 로마테니라 피기기 주생인데 라신 시도.
So therefore, we should understand when we are going through the discussions of this, we're actually, discussing on the fourfold emptiness that we find in the Heart Sutra, which is form is emptiness, emptiness is form is not other than emptiness, not other than form. That is what we were talking about here. And so when we talk about form is emptiness, on the basis of form, when one comes to understanding, when one comes to, the realization of the actual mode of existence of the form itself, then the very basis of form will be, basis of the form itself appears to oneself completely different than it used to appear to oneself.
텔레데 양파 뒤로 동서나 노아다 동바싱이 들어와. 배나 주 텐데 임바 사나 동인데 걸라. 롱아 타가라기 돈이 장용이. 주 돈이 임바데 계셔시 왜 걸라. 주데 텐데 임바데 시 왜 걸라. 동바데 텐데니데 소소나나 단다 템바 투병 공바데 또에 말해서네. 저러면치 타지는 소로.
So here, when we think about the form being dependently designated or dependently originated, then very understanding of dependent origination of the form itself must be empty of inherent existence. This must be understood. In the same manner, when we come to understanding of form being in lack of inherent existence, one should have the idea of form being dependently designated or dependently originated. So therefore, when you come to understand, when these two views of dependent originations and then emptiness are, or not alternate, then you have found what is called the thoughts of the able ones. Otherwise, without which, if you still remains alternate, then you have not found the thoughts of the Buddha.
소소게 냐네 또 돈바지 때는 가통이나 전득이 수기 단다 치기도 소소관의 치자네 돈이시 고하다네 돈바다 동화세게 뜻이 고하려네 근데 치랑지를 치자네 아니 빠졌으면 자체를 동토이나 뭐네 리피 제선 당이 아니 조화태다세네 의미네서도 해들어.
So this is how we should always try to think about. When it comes to the emptiness, it is very, beneficial for us to really to reflect one's mind upon the fourfold emptiness, as we talked about earlier, and then think about how things actually appearance and emptiness. In other words, how things appears to us, and how things really are. When you are able to reflect one's mind upon this, you are able to reflect upon both appearance as well as emptiness of this appearance.
당가서 시에바산지고 아니 감바산지 질레 제거야나 아니 개체 담면서도 초사세는 가르치는 제거를 와. 변을 하바든 가서 템포 투병 번 니지 제와시나 보통 보면 주는 너다나 치신다를 진상주 식당에서는 아니 상주선 동반이 또 별로다 상주선이 된다라 제시 아니 버더 보면다 신데 용수 줘봐 땅에 아니 냐래 가르치는 제거를 오늘 고알에서 땅가서 고구문도 가르쳐서는 소식이 정인듯이 인정도 저거로 피게들.
So it is really not that easy for us to really to grasp onto these teachings of emptiness. And just by listening to the teacher, regardless of how skilled the teacher may be, although one may have an intellectual understanding of what is meant by emptiness and so forth, but one may not have an actual realization of emptiness. Why? Because we are lacking, adequate accumulation, merits, and purification, which is really, really needed for us. Even the Buddha Shakyamuni himself, in his previous lifetime, in order for him to have this understanding of dependent originations, the view of dependent originations, he has sacrificed his own life, his children's, and went through a tremendous practice of accumulation of merits and accumulation and the purifications. So therefore, we as the followers of the Buddha's footstep, we also do the same. We also have to do the same.
아야, 들으잖아요. 셈발은 좋아도 또 두고데. 아니 대대시 따와이나. 아니 그 소소 가서만은 힘 메토리지 제게 힘 힘도리지 제거나 얘네 수는 춘들로나 아니 대스 갈래갈래 비유에 제하러.
So this is how we should always practice, meditate, accumulation merits and accumulation and purifications. And then eventually we will be able to see the changes is taking place in one's own, one's continuum, one's own mind. And just like we are nurturing, how we nurture the trees and plants, we just having a plant alone is not adequate because it requires, proper care of watering and, providing what is needed for the survival of the plants and so forth.
아, 당연히 로야. 가서 배정 완나 전도 내세 되게 카도 있었어.
Sikse 그런지.
아, 실세래. 실세이나.
sikse레레시. sikse레 대들 고작이 세대 고작이 초조 용수다진 넘버 잡아 담지도 미고 넘버 내가 임바다스 랑이 주라고 신도녀
야.
하게 신도는데
아,
연대 지된 내가 담아통 왔어.
가세는 미션. 그래서.
이래 생에 띵이 인지다 니자 다가라 뒤겹셔.
야, 다라. 가슴에 가니. 这是也那样也这个没那么些，嗯，这把领导这个双天俺可是多菜，这现在看了不知道是我的那一家庭是多菜，这是的到面上是。对，我们现在就，我的当然都搞的，哎呀，对起，现在对什么落下啥子样，我都俺确定起来落，你就是各种各的就把的节目搞的人都讲是啥样，对，看到这几一套呢，俺觉得三百的流量的，但是说投入钱呢，那可确认就要给他偏到要了啥的，像我说，你这差能着下来的，就是多半年下来的基本多啊，确定基本是个对什么那样。我记三百确认的就够的，但是起码去了300几卡路了，讲呢，带偏路了啥的。
So, sometimes I feel like just keep reading it and, giving just auto transmission, but then also, it's, when we have a time and we just, not only just reading through it, but try to give some kind of, some kind of explanation. We not be go through the detailed explanation, but I will try to do some kind, little explanation here and there so that we'll have, we'll be able to understand what this actually, the current chapter is actually teaching, what kind of discussion is happening and so on. So which will really help us to understand the view of those, different philosophical tenets.
我都是，谢谢来讲解。这道科学家的说起，用是大金，那不叫把汤气当，而且汤气当敏感话，那不呢把盐巴汤，让给说，让把现在年话呢年话，觉当点把得到当个话现在。人别觉当语言的其他呢吧，大马同也，确的让给觉呢，写作我长不大。送把我们比路，等到点了别菜嘛当，他你别菜米，那的我也那家，这都是没别去大金，宽的这那家汤去，下巴吃吧啦，年吧下午说呢，天天他家那个简单的，对吧？的下午生气落下来，这人落毛的，俺就落着下来。
We're on to page 237, third paragraph. The clear word states, thus, our position is completely pure of any logical flaw and definitely does not contradict any traditional presentation of conventional or the ultimate reality. Well, your position is obvious and serve flaws and thus contradicts those traditional presentation. Through utter foolishness, you do not see these faults and good points accurately. Those faults that you attribute to me are yours. The mathematical system mentioned in this previously cited passage in an irreversible presentation, driving both from valid cognition and to determine what is ultimate, and from conventional valid cognitions.
你把晓得，这的，我们探究给人的前面那样一种呢，你捐给打把的，因此呢，听这个前面捐给打把的了，你夸大两个人对比，那家的下去吧了，你把那写书送的啊。
And it says, hence you can be certain that it is completely pure of logical flaws, and that allows you to make a complete exposition of cyclic existence in nirvana. Or else, if the claim Mathematics have no system or of their own, were considered irrefutable, then the claim irrefutable, then the claim or everything that you say is lie would also be refuted, even the slightest degree, for similar reasons. That's all.
Teta mayin pa sa, oma pala rangi lu me da she mawa la chun dao se me na, si mawa yin ba te tangchi ne zunbi tsui yin no, she ba la yang su chung zi jang jin ba mini ba jo de jinsen tangchi ne tsumbi she ro, ken lin me ba mawa la, ken lin yu bi, she ba sha me be, di shi ru chun ge do me de, 这样开马路比说鞋讲马米尼的，但但那马他就专业了，鞋马车车他就都专业了，鞋马也车电你，准备车因比鞋把下面别，让给车个我点把米尼比鞋当就把来送的。
So then objections, those who claim to assert nothing are sorry. Those who claim to assert nothing are not subject to analysis as to whether or not they have any assertions. So because we accept nothing at all, no one can refute us. Reply, this too is untenable. For if it were tenable, then even in the case of those who claim all claims are false, those who claim all claims are false, one could not show that they have contradicted their own words, because their claim that all words are false would by your logic precludes analysis of the veracity of those very words. So it is also not tenable because the Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way states.
第一点到有啥得着？我说得看得的，学堂就让心就马住那，让心就马住些别气的呀，让心就出个马来。但在那气的也，人家让心没把搞出个马来的是呢。就是气的准备下个来，准备人家点到点不说出个马来是老来的。
So what other system is actually arguing here is when you say that that everything is lack of inherent existence, then the very lack of inherent itself is lack of inherent existence. And such lack of inherent existence, how can such lack of inherent existence can refute its object of negation?
有把来是，给的当个我不住着呢。三大中绝对没名就写那么不把也碰不当的。他的刚的样绝对没比到这个开朗吧那样，这个人那碰不当，记得他的刚都马过去，得到的绝对没吧，没得这瞬间吧没那的，国家给电你当，人都绝对没比到这是越界嘛，也嘛把了。电力当前刚荣都绝对越过所西比西把下面比小了些，连到比出比小了，刚才这是越界嘛呢？碰不当电力的人都没办个外，电力都绝对没办，没得别西把的如果是西嘛完呢，这样开门了呢？这样嘛的，这样嘛嘞那看来没得鞋嘛鞋吧，嘛没容啊，给你从说可了，那没得鞋嘛那没比那的心情接不当是可了，看来没得鞋嘛当，看来没把电你看来那鞋嘛，你当从说三万呢是。说我们马过完跑一点，的他国家开了没把电你开了那些没跑我呢继续跑娘呢开了没多些跑的，跑的开了没把开了过所些短把一边，让谁我帮把美女说是，去就跑我点着我的。对，我们比如明白呢，爸爸要是说起农场呢，如本爱心大着急，路是样家都没了，上街前去路是样没容易， chun dele shuru tun jiro sa omma pa tang deyi nane jang dawa chabi lus mana teda ranlu me bangawa yino sundu. Enti jensan chindu tesha.
Yes. The Chandrakrita's commentary on the middle way states, if there were some self that existed in reality, then it would be something that exists with the body as does the mind. It would not be infallible. In response to Vastiputriya's belief that there is a substantially existing self that cannot be described as either the same or the different from the aggregates. So this passage says that if the self exists substantially, it must be susceptible to the descriptions either as the same or as different from the aggregates. But if you are right, then it would be possible for the Visapuchras to answer. You cannot engage in the analysis of this kind. Suppose you argue that you can engage in analysis as follows. If Vasiputras claim that the person substantially exists, it is incorrect for them to hold that the person cannot be described in terms of those aggregates, as this would contradict their view that the person is neither the same as the aggregate nor different from them. If you to make this argument, then by the same token, that the very statement, if I assert nothing, I have no assertions. No assertions constitute as sincere claims. You might argue that the following two situations are similar, saying that we have no wealth, and receiving and receiving the reply. Give me the wealth which is no wealth, and saying we accept nothing and receiving the reply. The acceptance of nothing, the acceptance of nothing is itself is accepting something. However, in making this argument, you misunderstand our positions. We're not claiming that not having assertion itself is an assertion. Well, then what are we saying? We are demonstrating that by sincerely claiming that you assert nothing, you necessarily assert that you assert nothing as a result, you inevitably cancel your own words. If claims like the ones you make do not belong to the mathematical system, then you contradict yourself by proving them nothing through the citation of the passage from the works of the noble Nagarjuna and spiritual son Harideva, and also claim that not be considered system of Chandrakritis, nor the system any of the Buddhists. Thus, they fall outside of the teachings. That's all. 10 minutes break. 네, 당연히 뭐 로드는 좀 맞지. 대신도 사 켜놓래 줘도 레네 너저너 제모 코난 줘봐 마만데 메리데 줄어서버 여봐 제모 정도 켜는 거서 셰발라양 주소 여봐데 케문에 장 제모 잡네
新的样开朗规避些了，开朗嘞做蛮多的一次，刚给我下的人当就把我让了说吧，那开朗规避人我长得开朗是些嘛样呢？让路没把让路没把了，没偏吧，嘛是那把样人喏，给的让路没把当人我长得。看老师写吧一样，写吧啊，可得到明白去家给我呢，当我一弄写，你得讲别别讲，女吧没那边，我送了女呢，呢，却让给刚还没错了还是。可家给托巴了说吧，去的日本呢，我才去了，我才了解，但答应呢，看来没把手机吃，你把件洗下个但经这些，马讲他得了，你不确别捐给的没被收了，给的他这样，因我长的就给让给路。面对的些嘛呢，让自己路高呢，谈自己人族比，大话这比路了，得把继续下的让自，让路了没容啊，现在谈这样没容了，谈这人我都。人我容啊人都让其讲个别我给人我写吧，我别写了，刚是身上人我对接让路了没得把点呢，身上的下对没容啊人都我们。谈起这点了，别谈起让给路了，没容了，人我长得就把这样，谈起我没容些让基本明白国家的我们把买那些小我点把人呢，我说的，这别结果就听见嘛，人家嘛等下过门的，
你的说法，
嗯，
also those who claim to advocate the mathematical system, and in particular the system of Chandrakirti, contradicts themselves by claiming to have no system of their own. Likewise, it is also incorrect to claim that everything that you set forth is posited only in terms of the perspective of others. In this way, hoping to free yourself from yourself in asserting anything, when you say that when you say that you must assert the existence of things such as form only in terms of the perspective of others, you may not be asserting the existence of things such as form, but you certainly must be asserting that you possess you possess form and such in terms of the perspective of others. So you have not freed yourself from all assertions. You have to assert that at that time there's another person in terms of whose perspective you possess things and yourself, and one who possess them. Therefore, the claim that you accept things only in terms of the perspective of others not only fails to imply that you have no system of your own, it actually vitiates against such a objections. We do not even claim that we have no system, or that we assert this. We assert thesis only in terms of perspective of others. However, from your point of view, it appears that we make these claims, reply these positions, denies sensory experience that even the local waters cannot deny. When you do not even experience what you yourself claim. How surprising that you should know that what we have for if you do deny the evidence of the sensory experience, then why do you need to insist you have no assertions? For no matter what you claim, you can deny it later and thus never be faulted. In opponents, we posit even reductio arguments only in terms of the perspective of others. We do not accept them in our own system. Then what does it mean for you to repeat it? The Spartan system, and to have faith in the system of Chandrakirti, the textual founder of the Prasangika system. But just as autonomous syllogism is inadmissible in your own system, so too reductive arguments are inadmissible. Just as the reductio arguments are inadmissible in terms of the perspective of others, you also end up using autonomous syllogism and as needed in terms of the perspective of others. We cannot call those persons Chittamatrans who accept this only mind-only philosophy in terms of the perspective of others, but we do not accept it in their own systems. Likewise, we cannot call them the persons Prasangika who while not allowing in their own system reductive argument, they establish the meaning of the middle way, nonetheless posit in the terms of perspective of others. And since those who advocate these positions are also not as Spartantika, since clearly shows that they are not a Madhyamaka.
Chidang nga tsunde ki tsuba keba kala ngotsungi riba sengi dada, ini ribi pongsan tani mungdo gori. Chidang na, oma tanja tarang kanki lo ye na, zuso chu chana na ya chaya di, koyo ngole yore, ngayi ngole yo ma, resi teke chake yo ma re, rwa. Tanda di ribi ki pongsan do tang chire do. De tama dala koyo chana oma ba mayo na shi sewa de mayo na si, koyo chala pena, zhengo da rango sengi ye, zuso chana na ya chaya yo kala jino yo ma re.
So here the arguments is having that when we talk about the form lack of intrinsic existence, or the form actually exists by its own side, or the lack of intrinsic existence, and these two arguments are made in general, but not in the perspective of others or one's own.
야 선제기 추 고고 비고라 디자레존라 추다지 덴바 추바 답은 소비 거여로 그 디지 텔라 키몰이 예슬라 그 말이 디자티 지선지 비던달라 아니 지 조소지처는 덴바 추바 예소 같은 여로
There are several teachings that Buddha has given in accordance with the inclination or the dispositions of their followers, those who are unable to digest the ultimate view of existence. Buddha has then given the teachings to them such that things does exist intrinsically and things has its own character and intrinsic character and so on.
뭐한테지 제신 대다 메자 여도 시 지땡 원시 다네 마와시 지비 된양서 나자 당지 정원시 비 콘스메롱데 최능라 랑긴 주비 장시 매번에 장시 예매 취진의 시비 리비 시원 조게 타니비 시버랑가이 뭘 민조비 세대 대 장시 매버주나 리시 되면든죠 은조와 타비 시당 용대니 레장 여도 시지된 모시 시송베 줄어서번나 여번조번 지대비 뭐 조바 송베 시로 근조 케만람비 어제 케만람 시송바네 세장비 용 케람바타 만람시비 되니지 계속대 장루라 케말렘바 케말레시 메데 제타 추지 영원데 다 시송비 시로 손데 용데 창조도 양스
The Chandrakirti's commentary on the middle way states that I say they exist for the effect, even though they do not. So taking the perspective of the world, I speak of itself. You cannot use this source to prove that all positions are taken only in terms of the perspective of others. Why? Because one posits the phenomena as lacking essential or the intrinsic nature only in the purview of the risen knowledge that properly analyze whether such a nature exists. One does not posit in the purview of the ordinary conventional consciousness. Why? Where the ordinary consciousness able to establish the lack of intrinsic natures, then risen knowledge would be pointless, which is absurd. Also, since that same text says, I say that exists taking the perspective of the world, it means that the existence of the form such is posited in terms of perspective of the world. When that text in the lines prior to those just cited states that we do not accept the conventional, it means that we do not accept dependent entities as Chittamatra accepts them. It does not mean that we do not, in our own system, accept the conventional, for it says real dependent entities such as you accept. This stands as a response to a chanted by Chittamatran's argument given in transitional passage of the commentary on the text. If you use this, if you use what is valid or reasonable to refute dependent entities, I will use your argument to refute that you consider the conventional. Hence, the meaning of this Chittamatans believe dependent entities to be things that can withstand rational analysis. I do not accept such conventional phenomena. Hence, we disagree as to whether one can use reason or refute them.
되게 단지 랑고데 정어세 제가 말했어. 대한당 요다 메싱에 아니 리시고 따고 돈이 덤바 주다 마주기 쉐비리 히랑시 주고 요다 메 요메다베 리시고 요다 메싱에 아니 대한당 요메 계셔 따사데레스. 네 조소유치나 견조된 조세에다라 마타 마시비츠나 견조 조치지레마도 시바시는 견조 조치지 말에서도 단다 되시.
So when we talk about whether such things that exist or not, it is not in the position. This is not that position is taken only in terms of the perspective of others. This is not what they are saying is here. It is entirely depends on the on the reason knowledge that properly analyze whether such and nature exists. And then similarly, when it comes to the conventional phenomena is something that can be existed, or something that can be seen, something that can appear, as something that can be existed when we do not undergo critical analysis.
네, 가서 봐 이제나 고대와 변화 ranshi 주여 말에서는 ranshi 주여의 말이 땅에 대서잖아. ranshi 주여의 땅에 리시티 용어면은 네 ranshi 주면서라고 그래서. 그 제바징이 용어를 예매다에 대란에 덴바 좀 주세요. ranshi 좀 주세요.
So when we talk about whether such things exist intrinsically or not, that this existence existed or not is really depends on how the valid reasoning and having the valid reasoning is stated, and how the valid cognition actually cognize that particular entity.
네, 조소저 전화세 되는 거죠. 변화 주도 카도데 까보레세 되고 카도 까보면 참마 코너게 까보 임바텔라. 근데 참마 전에 보면은 다래마도 그 내루를 제가 치가요 말에.
So when we talk about the conventional phenomena such as white form is white and blue, so on and so forth, and it is just mere mere existence of the form, the appearance of the color of this form. We're not talking about the actual existence, the mode of existence of the color of the form.
Tene sede ene rangwa de jangwa penda rang de jen sede nga de chö ro ene kyu ngo le yo nge ngo le yo ma re se ke chate ji xie chen xie sa yo ma ro.
So such statement is not relevant, because when if you use that saying that this is a perspective of others, the position are taken only in terms of the perspective of others, or the position is taken only in terms of one's own.
Jung de cong jo de yang chi chi ji te bang ri be jiang se na che rang ge ri ba na ji nge chang chi ji gyun zo se lo xie zi bi len yin be jiang ri be xie xie zhe ji ngon bo chu de ba ta gyun zo na de da nge men de be ri ba ngo mi ni ngo ni me ni me chung so xie bi tuan yin bi xie rong ji de ji ngo xie ba ne rang lu mi bi yin wa la se wa ma yin ji ta ni bi xie bi nu mi nang la xie ba yin de gyun zo bi tuan nang yue ban jo ba tang ji ne de yin ngo la ya gu bi xie dang o ma ba rang gi ji la yang ta ni ju bi ce ma de na yue bi xie ro de na me chang xie ba de rang gi ce ni ji me ba la xiao rangi tseni chi meja de yu to xie xiawa, meja yu to xie xiawa, mirong de rangi ngarsan de rangi tani bi tuan nam chi jo ci yin la, rangi tseni chi zhuba tani dayang me bi xie dang, de yun zheba, de yi xie je to, jite na yu ba dang, me ban de ba ne, nge yang de dan de to, xie zhang ba na, me ba mirong bi xie ro, de na, tuan dang de me jang, tani do yu to xie mang do, xiong wa da yin be, me jang yu to xie ba tuan, tani do song wa, la, ji yang me to song do, wana zhen do le, zhen do ne si.
We do take the expression taking the perspective of the world refers to the perspective of others who do not belong to our own system. Rather, it refers to the unimpaired conventional consciousness. This is because the existence of a conventional object must always be posited within the purview of such a consciousness, and because the valid cognition that possesses conventionalities exists even in the Madhyamaka's own mind systems. Therefore, we take the words even though they do not exist to refer to their lack of existence by way of intrinsic characters. So the passage should be closed as I tell them they exist even though they do not exist by way of their intrinsic character. It is inappropriate to close it as I say that exists even though they do not exist. This is because this passage represents our way of positing conventional object in which existence by way of intrinsic character is not possible even conventionally. Also, in the portion of the commentary of this to his commentary on the middle way, it explains that best as the Chandrakriti states as I accept whatever exists or does not exist for the world just as the world does. Thus, the passage cannot taken to mean that things do not exist. Therefore, since there are many such instances in which the text states, even though these two do not ultimately exist, they nonetheless exist conventionally. There is not the slightest fault in taking the existence, what is affirmed, and the existence that is denied as having different meaning in the passage. I say that exists even though they do not. In objections, you still have to explain what narration's refutation and objections.
Yeah.
When it says the Madhyamakas have no position and thesis. That's all.
Digi tenda tse shige de me ja yodo se kanche tan rangshi ji me ja tanya to yodo singi di kuwa le nengar se de redo me ja se de rangshi me bal ko rangi tsenyi me bal ko gore se yoba de rangi tsenyi ji me na yang tanya to yoba la ko gore es antela antela taji gangi shiji chi bare zoso chi chono kendo to jo si tang ani tanya rishi tsemi wala ani me ba singi de ne tenta me bal ko gore so tenta de resh.
So here it says, although they do not exist intrinsically, but they do exist. What that means is this, what it means is saying that there's no such things that actually exist intrinsically, but they do exist conventionally. That is what it means.
오만은 이제 텐트비 근도 말아 세대 아니 고볼루게 고볼루 잡아 파덴다오데 존 세대 간제 이제는 트라비 근도 세는 페나 까보생데 이제는 요스 트라바레 아니 까보데 자원이네 요 말에서는 이제 트라바는 게 바로 데디 그 타니도 요스데 이제게 트라바당 만게와 지차고 오마 타지 다윤 조스.
So we should not, when we are holding our view, when we are holding on our view, ultimate views, and making sure that we are not actually loosening our view on conventionality, because in the Nagarjuna stated that when you are reflecting on non-inherent existence of things and event, you should not actually let go of conventionality, where it says, such as the white, green, and so forth. They do exist conventionally, but they do not have intrinsic existence.
완전 준도 내스 리빙고 쇼다 단자 매바 시비 대강이 강 인방 시거라사 녀거랑게 응주베 장시매다 시바 단자와네 텐제 인비 시르시비 텐시당 빼나 주니진 시비 빼양 되고라사 대다 쇼제당 저비 수니지 텐시당 Te drupa shayi druzha tang, te tobi jepa joyi nga la tene, shugo la jeba ndo na, te itse ranji mi ji mi la dangwa zangda sebe ranji ngobi ngewa ji sha nyana, te la tangja tang shu meba shebang, cheja ge zhangwa ta yang yola asa. Ke lang Jagobayang, Temashi, Song Yuebe, Tetsanshi Changne, Sho Meba Juba Galani, Wana Ranjin Mebi, Tangja Yuna, Ranjin Juro Shebi, Toba Jewane, Shinda Demba Shi, Den, Chi Shinda Chayi, Ganesan, Shiro, Deyelena Ranlu Jubi Gosun, Cheban Joro, Osondo, Tela Zendole, Osondo. Wande Marachi Masharash.
The Nagarjuna's repetition of objection means that when it says that the Madhyamaka have no position and thesis, if we adopt as this thesis, the seedling has no essential or the intrinsic nature. Thus, you also have to accept that the reason because it is dependently arising things. And an example, for example, like for the reflected image, according to your accept, that's a logistic statement creates for the opponents a reason that has bearing on the subject and has no two forms of provision or perversions, and probandum that the reason proves, and an inference that understands the probandum. This being the case, then aside from simply hating the name autonomous syllogism, why do you go to trouble for the refuting autonomous syllogism? Reply, again, refutation of objection.
되게 단다리 되래. 배나 저기 데려와. 네가 엄마 타ጆ하기 랑지 댄스에 태그 말세요라. 아니 저랑 여담에 왜 가서 쇼다 다제 매버시 단다시 비거라. 녀그 랑시 지투바 여마레 댄데제 배나 존예제스라고도 대처라기 될라텐데 조자이 지바치 안되고요나. 아니 저 랑지 발라 이네 당한테서 제게 제세 가르리 랑지 바 고바데 저랑 칼레가 다가츠레서. 너리 시그다. 니와시바 데메레노지.
So here the argument goes by saying that you have earlier cited that saying that everything such as form and so forth are dependently arising and they're dependently existence. So therefore, they are not intrinsically existence. That is what you have said. And now the other party is arguing that if this is the case, then why you are actually arguing, why you are, refuting the Madhyamaka Swadhantika's, standpoint. You have no point of, refuting Madhyamaka Swadhantika's standpoint.
데레 베나 안된도 안가서 베나 랑시제 메비 당자여나 랑지 조로시비 도바테네 문에 제 초고레스 네 제와든 문에 덴바레 덴리기 당자데 이게 까네데 시엠 바카사 데메보조알 까네 신데 첨보레서도 베나 가서 요거지제 덴바메데 덴리레스비 다데네 랑지제 덴세레베 네 랑지 고비 덴세레와세네 쇼니가 캐네오로 되게 네 데가에 되네 저랑이 도바제가 된 문에 덴바레 So it
is a very subtle reasoning, it says, because in the seedling being not ultimately existent, because seedling is dependent on its own causes and condition, and such syllogistic reasoning is accepted by both Madhyamaka Prasangika and Madhyamaka Swadhantika. So therefore, there's no contradiction in between these two. But what makes difference between this? What is the difference? What is actual difference between these two? Is when it comes to the seedling being non-inherent existence or the intrinsic existence, because seedling it is dependent originate. Then there's a difference.
Tela zendo le sa tangcha meba somba ne ngobo ranshi me to she oma ben ma la ngoma ye sa teta tangcha yu chi de la ranshi ye na ngobo tangchi ranshi meba me te la ranshi me na ranshi ye ba ngo mini so she zeba la choba yin la ranshi meba la gaju ji xiaxie tang mara xiaxie tepa ma zuendo ji zangzhe zhangba ta yin no se tena tangcha yume ne ji yume zeba ma yin ji ngobo tangji ranshi medo xeba tangcha yu ci ranshi yume zeba yin la yin be tenda yi tangcha yu ci de la ranshi yueba ke la ne ngobo tangji ranshi meba tangja wa tang gewi jun nye la yue na nye de da mende be jun de nga la mebi duen yin be tangja mebi zhuxi de mirong de ranshi meba tang ranshi meba tang meba ni chiba shinde che yu shiro chiba shinde che yu shiro so
Reply: the refutation objection does not explain. We have no thesis and a position. There are no thesis in the position, just as you have cited it, but since there are also many passages that states that it is necessary to posit in assertions, how can simply citing that one passage prove that Madhyamakas have no positions? It is quite true, however, that there has been concern that anyone who holds that absence of the intrinsic existence as a thesis, as a thesis is a Subhatantika. This is because this is an exceedingly subtle and difficult points. Our response to that will be explained when we set forth our own positions. As for the Nagarajuna's statement in the refutation of the objections that he has no thesis, Madhyamaka say that things like intrinsic nature, there's but the essentialists argue that if the words of such thesis have an intrinsic nature, then it is incorrect to say that all phenomena lack intrinsic nature. If those who would like intrinsic nature, then they cannot repudiate the existence of the intrinsic natures. However, something without intrinsic nature can be functions to prove or to disprove, according to previously cited passage from the repetition of the objection and its commentary. This is admissible. Therefore, the issue as to not having thesis is not argument about whether Nagarjuna has them in general. It is instead the argument as to whether the words of this thesis, all things like intrinsic natures, have intrinsic natures. Hence, the meaning of the line of the refutation of the objection is this: if we accept that the words for such thesis had intrinsic nature, then it could be refuted contradicting that thesis that all this like intrinsic natures. But because this do not accept, that cannot be faulted. This is why these lines cannot be taken as proving the Madhyamakas have no thesis. For this, every great difference between the absence of the intrinsic existence and non-intrinsic existence, and the verses of the refutation objections.
대체 내가 속아서 이게 취지 transare 나라 단자 매변은 나는 주매 권한이 있지 되게 랜드 저들어 근데 라시 주가 단자여나 아니 죄들 해그래 내 라시 주가 단자 매와 인자네 근데 라시 마주비 땡도 아니 딱견적이 나야 되어 인자네 나를 죄여 말이야 예스 계셔되래.
So from one's own side it says there's no such your criticism will affect me because when I say there's no such intrinsic existence, I'm not actually refuting the existence of conventionality.
게대 무슨 라소비 시소지 무슨 라소비 가양 미버메버 som바 양치 나 치세지 롱장바다 서마다 제자라 저기 주비 미자다 미지 메바 템바 인지 땡조게 서마당 게 말이 제자 메바 템바 메노 대양 그 삼바라 뭐버랑게 체니 무슨지 주나 고바 테나 엄마배 뭐버 탕제 장시지 동바오 셰마와나 무슨 당아마레 무슨 다데 이제와 양 무비 나도 되게 장시지 동고라 대다나 매바 임베 대명고 고 냐도 삼바 인데 용데네 존도레 레시 뭐버 무슨지 미는도바 시에이나 강게 뭐나 민주와 무슨데네 매바 인 시에바 데이렌 일라스 데인제바양 게데 추정 뭐버 탕시 무슨지 미네 뭐버 탕시 동바오 시엔 도바 시에나네 롱나 대양 테바 마인데 ji shi ri xie na, ngu bu tang ji ji nang du ne, ngu sun ji chen mang du bi shi ri dong ba yin la, ngu bu la mi ba xie ba gang yin ba de le yang dong ba yin no, di shi ri chen me mi ba me do. Me mi na ngu ba yang me te be, de la ngu bu tang ji ne dong ba wo, xie ma wo gang gi yin ba de te ba ma yin no, xie sun bi shi ro, ji jia ba le song do.
The verses of repetition objections, if sensory perceptions and so forth, does state that sensory perceptions and such have no perceptions at all. So, however, according to the previously cited passage from the clear words, this means that the valid cognition and the phenomena it perceives are, it perceives are not essentially existence in a perceived object and the perceiving agents. It does not mean that there are no dependently arising valid cognition of the phenomena that they perceive. In the essentialist, opinions, even if the intrinsic character of things established by sensory perceptions could be refuted, the mathematical claim that all things are empty of intrinsic nature would still requires that sensory perceptions and an object perceived by it be empty of intrinsic nature in as much as they are included among things. In this case, sensory perceptions and objects perceived by it would be in their view that be non-existence. Hence, one cannot refute the intrinsic character of things. That passage from the refutation of objections, which states the sensory perceptions lack perception, is given in answer to this essentialist view, a view which it states in this lines. If the things perceived by sensory perceptions were then repudiated the sensory perceptions by which things are perceived would itself be non-existence. The commentary on the line states, nor is it possible to claim that the perception observes all things and then to repeat them by stating all things are empty. Why? Valid sensory perception is included among all things and it's therefore empty. That which perceived things would also be empty. Therefore, there would be no perception by valid cognition. What cannot be perceived also cannot be refuted. And hence, the claim that all things are empty is not valid. As for the line for the Arya, there was 400 sentences.
야, 되게 그런 저밖에 로통도 되래. 그래서 매번다 라시지 매번인데 지도 산에 아니 엄마 타죠. 저번 로타래.
양계수나 림시.
매번다 라시지 매번인데 여 마셔와체. 아니 여 마셔대다 라시지 매 자와진에 매나 되는데 이셔 전태기도 세제로.
So these arguments are all, directed towards not understanding of difference between the non-inherent existence and non-existence, because it is really hard for the others to accept when we talk about this inherent, non-inherent, the things doesn't exist inherently, and they always think of that if something that doesn't exist inherently, then it should not be existed. So this is all the argument between this argument of this regarding this.
내가 좀 뭐지게 뭐세요. 딱 가서 치즈 병 하더베게 다와치 마치 인조마지 여여바만 매매바만센 하상도 뒤딱 가서 베게 세대기 저다 뭐벌 다와 가는 용도로다. 내가 당은 데서를 두고 얘기로 하다.
So those
뭐 쉬우지 장저바죠.
arguments are, even the same assertions that we have in the scholars of the earlier disseminations of the Buddha Dhamma in Tibet. Those scholars have the same assertions If something that doesn't exist, doesn't exist intrinsically or inherently, then it should not be existing.
This was Jabales, Yodameta, Yumeche, Sheso Somba Ne, Dei Jabale, Tomba Ni the Mawala, Yurimbu, Jiang Sunjin, Juminiba Dem, Dela, Chudi Tomba Ni Dong, Mundu to Xie Mayana, Deba Kanya may be Konsu, Chitarong, Junjele, Kangi Shell, Taba Yoba Mawa. Nangla ni su mawan dene meribe deni ji shir ni la dene sunjinba tang le maye oma ba nangba tangche do la menye do jige do papa le ye tang me da xie so ji gamba ji chang so son da ani ngai de ja shi
As for the line for the ayat, there was 400 standards. You can never repeat Chandrakirti's commentary that teaches us one cannot refute the advocates of emptiness, no matter how long one cites. Since you claim that you do not even assert emptiness, how can you cite this passage in support to having no assertions at all? Chandrakirti's explanation of the middle way commentary quotes those four lines in the following passage. It is incorrect for those who advocate the position that things exist only as designations to advocate dualism. Therefore, those who advance, critiqued and response grounded in dualism, refuting men's petitions of the Spartantica or the Parthangika distinctions. Dualism, it's grounded in the dualism against the Madhyamaka. Never find the slightest foothold, as Aradeva 400 stanza says. No matter how long you try, you can never rebut those who have no positions. You regard existence and non-existence of the both.
아주 단대 쇼고 송스도 되게 저거 가지 이거는 저거 도문님도 선바지가 진도와 되게 전에 되게 레시드 로드도 아니 도대체 대리 한 가서 당한서 되잖아요 뭐하지 당하도 되게 초보차네 통 매번 건지 매버로 다 말이 매버데 세수하이나 아니 쳐다지라비 제네 지르라 잡아진데 세요야죠 다 되지 얘네 요행이가 저기 demand다 배전다 소사 지상은 배거로 되지 전에 다 아니 돈이도 시라 손을 저랑지를 전에 아니 손주죠 거만이 완전도 더 내봐 아니 제가 제네 받는 주변 아무서다 제가 신자라도 소사나에는 뭐하다 뭔가 저러지.
Let's do the dedication years. So it is because of not having the familiarize with this subject matter from the beginningless time due to our ignorance. We're kind of, sometimes even because going through the reading of this, we get lost in the middle. So it is because that indicates that it really requires us to, adequate accumulation mirrors and the purifications. So therefore, whatever that we have discussed today, may all these discussions become a source of understanding of this profound text and accumulation mirrors and insight, so that we can gain the state of enlightenment for the benefit of all of the sentient beings. May all the Buddhas, Bodhisattvas, please inspire me to be able to do this.
老月今年少边给我的电脑着我给了钢边，小波就是老上着我电边人不人，热人说少人不人就人们多长，热烧的人年的肩膀的，上学人都面对被我。 诸根能得行了，是不是？切瓦根得养得了吗？这面去就别了，老是撒旦老是有点绕走，多久唱给过往年的说也当个人，面对那个那要面对的人都别来从你的。看到阳光刚是扫把的，老面毛人给动着我弄成家也红包大酒，天马人别踩了个多样，江边养着在外结上的，改别人把跟上浪接着，你那周边见到你是。让给这些多变浪觉呢，手掌在外上面打开，若也越觉明白这些呢，家也等把有人成就，两把人前出给马家帮，家家娘把这边说的，你就千百也让就把也。别的三话七话，三间教育民众真的了。列柱上处能觉人别讲，常得能觉一郎别得心，教育这把人都讲究，朗诵主编听见主席经，给进世界莫当明明给。切罗更多教育我把耶，这我莫就，刚才贴吧就了只是，实现住了尊巴的原则，多点那这大多主席，这些将子就就是那面国才让点睛，那个城里说着就不到。老庄的别人们扫松，昼夜面色到多年就结，靠着正月过夜星光，偏当的我毛脸就业，今日在我的人叫做，小百姓的不多年就结，靠着。江边八月接大清宝当，更多上报太阳的人。跌到跟着就是大路上，给我跌到当街绕多我，就从西边叫我当街，我刚那出多我把的，大街个月早晚的跟着，从不是绕多我就。嗯，这些给你们学的。